You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
The primary election is just over a month away, and a lot can change between now and then. But the latest poll numbers show that the Republican race for governor is a two-man race between Richard Irvin and Darren Bailey. The poll numbers show that Richard Irvin has just over a 4-point lead on Darren Bailey, despite vastly outspending him over the past few months. We now welcome you to our Reporters Roundtable. We'd have Brenden Moore, the state political reporter for Lee Enterprises, as well as Dave Dahl, a reporter for WTAX here in Springfield.
Now, Mark Maxwell is no Cole Hankey. Just remember that.
I appreciate that, Dave. That was why I brought you on today, just for that line. So, yeah, but I want to start with this. Over a 4-point lead for Richard Irvin. It's a smaller lead than previous polls have really shown. But Brenden, when you saw these numbers, what was your initial takeaway?
Well, Cole, my initial takeaway is, as you said in your intro, it's a two-man race between Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin and State Senator Darren Bailey. And I think even more than that, it shows that even despite all the money that's been poured into the race by the Irvin campaign, who has basically been benefacted by billionaire Ken Griffin, who's poured $45 million so far, probably more coming. It's still a relatively tight race. Honestly, Darren Bailey has room to grow. And I know we're going to get into some of these poll numbers in a minute, but there are indications that if certain things happen in this race, it could really change the trajectory. Say if former President Donald Trump gets involved and makes an endorsement. Senator Bailey has hinted at that in recent weeks. We'll see if it actually happens.
Richard Irvin's campaign, we know that he's hammering crime. He has the billionaires supporting him already. We don't really know where's the next move for him over this next month and a half. He had a press conference earlier this week where it was one of the few times he's addressed reporters since he really launched his campaign, and it didn't go that well for him. He got some headlines. I think it was one of the Chicago newspapers called it Deflection Day. Dave, I know you weren't in the press conference at Aurora, but listen along. I mean, what did you think about that effort from him going forward, and how that kind of set his campaign going forward?
But who's going to pay attention to that? Well, the voters remember that, but I think it's clear that he can't articulate what he stands for. And that's something they've got to fix between now and the election. They're hoping to paper over that with some money, but you'd think there ought to be a debate with all the candidates. And how much, again, are the voters really paying attention to things like that? Irvin is obviously trying to appeal to the center and left to get votes because that's how the math works. Bailey is not.
And to add on what Dave was saying, I mean, it's pretty clear that the Irvin campaign is employing, I guess, the Aurora version of a Rose Garden strategy of we're going to blanket the airwaves with TV advertisements, and we're going to put mailers in the mail, basically communicating their campaign's message. And this has allowed them to control the narrative. At the same time, we're going to limit our interactions with the press. We're going to limit the amount of forums and debates that we do with our fellow candidates. And we're just going to hope that the advertising is enough to get them over the hump in the primary. And I think if those polling numbers are any indication, is that they may have to rethink that strategy a little bit, because the message that they're selling is not necessarily resonating.
Yeah, so getting more into the nitty-gritty of this poll, there's one part in particular that really stands out to me for where this election could really go moving forward, is the number of undecided voters. And when you pair that with the number of voters that say a Trump endorsement would really swing their vote. The raw polling data shows that there are 57% of those polled said that a Trump endorsement would make them more likely to vote for a candidate. And within that 57%, 37% say that they are still undecided. Now, the difference there is that one candidate in this seemingly two-man race is actively seeking that Trump endorsement. The other won't even say if he's ever voted for Trump.
And the funny thing about that, Cole, is if you look at some of the mailers that the Irvin campaign is sending out, they're basically saying that Darren Bailey and Jesse Sullivan, another fellow candidate, are never Trumpers, are liberal Democrats that voted for Obama and President Biden. And I think anybody who follows this somewhat closely knows that's not true. Darren Bailey was a 2020 Trump delegate. But as you said, he hasn't said whether or not Irvin has not said whether or not he's voted for Trump in 2016 or 2020, or if he'll vote for him in 2024. So it's kind of just a very, it's almost two different realities that they're trying to live in here.
If you get all of the people who are all in for Trump in Illinois, you're not going to have enough people. There just aren't that many of them, which is a big reason of why Irvin is kind of, well, he's appealing to the middle and left, and he's hard to pin down on some of the issues. Witness his news conference of this week, where, you know, he's just trying to amass the most votes possible. And in another news conference this week, House Minority Leader Jim Durkin was asked, why do we need a Governor Irvin? And it boiled down to, because he's the one who can beat J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah, and I actually had Jim Durkin on the show a few weeks ago, and he said one of the key reasons for that is because Irvin can win the suburbs. No, that's part of this whole, you know, all of the polls, all of the election data. That's a key part, is where these voters are at as well.
And Cole, I think that's why you're seeing him be so reluctant to talk about an issue like abortion. Obviously, it's going to be one of the most hot-button issues given the impending decision from the Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade. And obviously, he wants to appeal to those suburban voters in the general election who are a little bit more moderate on that issue, maybe more pro-choice. But obviously, to win a Republican primary, you have to win those conservative voters. And we remember just 4 years ago how Governor Rauner, incumbent sitting governor, almost lost his primary, largely because of signing a pro-choice measure into law.
Another rhino.
And so that's the needle that he's trying to thread. And so it's like, let's try to get out of the primary without making any waves and hurting our chances in the general election against J.B. Pritzker.
Dave, can he do that? You already kind of addressed this. He's not really making his stances firm. I mean, if you go to Richard Irvin's website, he has crime as his top issue, some tax relief items, things like that. But that list is, you know, 3 items long when you're talking about this. Can he get through an election, a primary election, this contentious without making his stances clear?
There are a lot of factors. I don't sense that a lot of people are dissatisfied with Governor Pritzker. The people who have made themselves known. They say there's a lot to dislike about him. Is there an appetite for change among the electorate? And this late June primary, I mean, that's something new. I would venture that, except for all of the radio and TV ads, if you were to survey, 10 people at the old State Capitol Plaza, like one of your competitors does, explain the story to them and then record their reaction, they're probably paying more attention to baseball or where they left their sunglasses than this primary election.
That's right. I mean, with 30, however many percent, saying they're still undecided in the middle of May, that's normally not good. Because
and how many people of those can correctly name what date this year's primary is?
Yeah, so I think that's obviously a factor for this. I mean, with all of that going forward, it's going to be interesting to see how this really develops in June, especially as the candidates really even more probably start to focus inward, and we start to see even more attacks on each other. But part of this with Bailey is that name recognition, getting his name out there. People know Darren Bailey. They know him for some of his acts over the past couple of years here in this building. But as far as him running for governor, as far as him as a candidate, we've seen Democrats, the Democratic Governors Association, kind of work in his favor to get him to that general election. But how does Bailey get his name out there more to compete with the absolute deluge of commercials and mailers you see from Irvin?
And I think that's going to be the big question moving forward, because if you look at, any political scientist will tell you that one of the number one indicators of who wins an election is who has the most name ID. And right now that's clearly Richard Irvin. But in a low turnout primary, where the most dedicated partisans show up, maybe Darren Bailey, who has a lot of support in the grassroots, will be able make up the difference. I think another factor here is it's the Trump card. It's the Trump factor. If President Trump makes an endorsement, that could, I'm not saying it will put any candidate over the top, but it doesn't hurt in a Republican primary, and it might make up for some of that deficit that he has in resources and name ID right now.
Yes, but why would Trump even get involved in this race? I think you've got to ask yourself that. I mean, he obviously would likely endorse Bailey if he were to make an endorsement, but you know, if I'm Trump, why make an endorsement at all in Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously Bailey's kind of riding the coattails of Mary Miller to try to get that endorsement. I guess there's different factors for why he may consider that. Obviously, Trump and Pritzker were not the best of friends, so having somebody who's staunchly in the Trump corner going against Pritzker may have that may have some benefits down the road. But there is that question. The only inklings we've heard about a Trump endorsement for Darren Bailey have been from Darren Bailey. He's just kind of been leaving some breadcrumbs. He's like, we may get Trump in the state at some point, for a Mary Miller event or something like that. And that's all we're really hearing about for that. So that's a whole different thing. You can talk about getting the Trump card, but what if you talk about getting the Trump card for so long, but it never actually comes? Could that have a negative effect for Bailey?
Absolutely. I think that Trump is still the most popular person in the Republican Party, and his endorsement still carries some weight. Obviously, not every time, but we did see a couple of races this past week where the Trump-endorsed candidate did win in a head-to-head primary. And so I think if you're a conservative who doesn't have as much resources as the quote-unquote establishment candidate, I think a Trump endorsement would certainly help his campaign. Obviously, right now they have some money, not nearly as much as Richard Irvin's campaign, and but having the former president who has the ear of the GOP primary base, that would make a difference. Whether he does it or not, that's a whole other question, though.
I guess we'll go final takeaways. I'll have you guys do some role playing here for a little bit. If you're in the Richard Irvin or Darren Bailey campaign, whichever one you want to choose, what are you taking away from that poll? We've already seen the spin from them, but if you're thinking pragmatically, what do you think the takeaway is?
Head down if you're Irvin, keep doing what you're doing, put your foot on the gas pedal when it comes to the advertising.
I think if I'm Darren Bailey, room to grow. That there are still a lot of undecided voters out there. The fact that Irvin is still, at least in this poll, in the mid-20s, shows that even after the deluge of ads the past few months, voters aren't necessarily convinced. And if you get a little bit more money, or maybe you get that Trump endorsement, that might be able to put you over the top.
If I'm Bailey, I'm saying I'm the only real Republican who can win. And if I'm Bailey, I'm trying to get as much earned media as possible because there's not all that much money in the Bailey war chest, as it were. Bailey can handle himself with reporters. People might not like what he has to say, but some will, and he's not going to run away from us. Not from me, anyway.
Brenden, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be right back.